over 400,000 years ago, a distinct human species settled and survived in the cold, harsh landscapes stretching from Western Europe to Central Asia. They were not Homo sapiens. They were Homo neanderthalensis, a now extinct branch of the human family, genetically close to us, yet adapted to a radically different environment. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals endured dramatic climatic fluctuations, including full ice ages and rapid ecological shifts. They played a critical role in human evolutionary history before disappearing roughly 40,000 years ago. The origins of Neanderthals trace back to Homo heidelbergensis, an ancestral hominin species that lived in Africa and Europe between 700,000 and 300,000 years ago. One population migrated northward into the colder, drier regions of Ice Age Europe. Over countless generations, natural selection sculpted them into a new form, physically robust, genetically distinct, and biologically specialized for survival in extreme cold. That lineage became the Neanderthals. Neanderthals were not primitive apes, nor the crude caricatures often portrayed in early media. They were fully human in form and function, with large brains, skilled hands, and an adaptive mindset. They controlled fire, made stone tools, organized group hunts, and responded strategically to their environment. Pleistocene-era archaeological layers confirm that Neanderthals were not isolated wanderers. They formed enduring settlements across vast territories, from Portugal and France to Central Asia and the Middle East. Modern genetic analysis has confirmed a key fact: Neanderthals were not our direct ancestors, but they were close relatives with whom we interbred. When Homo sapiens began migrating into Europe around 50,000 years ago, they encountered Neanderthal populations. The genetic legacy of that interaction remains today. Most non-African humans carry between 1% and 2% Neanderthal DNA. Archaeological findings provide a detailed picture of their lives. Neanderthals built shelters, lived in small organized groups, used the Levallois technique to craft stone tools, and hunted large game with coordinated tactics. Many recovered skeletons show signs of healed injuries, suggesting that group members cared for the wounded and maintained a social structure based on mutual support, possibly including family-like bonds. Neanderthals were not evolutionary failures. They represent a parallel human lineage, developed independently and successfully within a demanding ecological niche. Their extinction does not erase their evolutionary significance. On the contrary, it raises profound questions. What defines humanity? Intelligence, language, culture, genetic continuity? Or perhaps all of these traits and more were shared by both species? If so, the Neanderthals were not fundamentally different from us. They were another version of what it meant to be human, and part of that version still lives within us today. Part 2: Adaptation and Intelligence. The Neanderthals did not merely survive in Ice Age Europe. They adapted and thrived in one of the harshest climates Earth has seen. Temperatures regularly dropped below -40 degrees Celsius, yet they endured for over 300,000 years. Their survival was not accidental. It was the result of biological, behavioral, and cognitive adaptation. Physiologically, Neanderthals were built for the cold. Their bodies were short and stocky, with wide torsos and powerful limbs. This compact form minimized heat loss. Their noses were large and broad, likely to warm and humidify frigid air before it reached the lungs. Their rib cages were expanded, supporting large lungs and high oxygen intake. These were not cosmetic differences. They were the product of natural selection under glacial conditions. But physical strength alone was not enough. The Neanderthals demonstrated a capacity for planning, coordination, and innovation. They developed tools using complex techniques like the Levallois method, which required multi-step processes and foresight. They organized group hunts using terrain and timing to ambush prey. These were not random behaviors. They were strategic, repeatable, and taught across generations. Fire played a central role in Neanderthal life. They did not simply use fire, they controlled it. Hearths have been found in dozens of Neanderthal sites, many showing signs of long-term maintenance. Fire was used for cooking, heating, protection from predators, and possibly for light in deep caves. It also served as a focal point for daily life. Controlled fire implies more than survival. It reflects mastery of environment. Evidence of symbolic thinking adds another dimension to their intelligence. Archaeologists have recovered items interpreted as ornaments, including pierced animal teeth and pigment-stained shells. These were not utilitarian tools. They likely had aesthetic or symbolic purposes. Burial practices provide further insight. At Shanidar Cave in present-day Iraq, a Neanderthal skeleton was found surrounded by pollen clusters, suggesting the placement of flowers at the time of burial. This is not definitive proof of ritual, but it strongly implies emotional awareness, memory, and possibly a concept of death and mourning. These behaviors are not primitive, they are cognitive. Even brain size supports this view. The average Neanderthal brain was as large as or even slightly larger than that of modern humans. Their skulls suggest a different shape, emphasizing regions related to vision and body control, useful for hunting, navigation, and tool use. The neurological evidence aligns with the archaeological record. Neanderthals were not intellectually inferior. They were adapted differently, taken together. The data reveals a species that did more than survive environmental extremes. The Neanderthals observed, learned, taught, and planned. They used fire, crafted tools with intent, and formed complex social structures. Their lives were not chaotic or instinct-driven. They were structured and intelligent, grounded in adaptation, cooperation, and memory. The idea of Neanderthals as brutish or simple is no longer tenable. Scientific evidence increasingly points to a different reality. They were thinking humans, shaped by the Ice Age, capable of symbolic expression, and deeply embedded in the evolutionary story of our species. Part 3. Tools and Technology. Neanderthal toolmaking was precise, planned, and technologically advanced for its time. Far from being improvisational or instinctive, their methods reflected complex cognition and an understanding of materials. One of the most striking examples is their use of the levallois technique, a sophisticated stone flaking method that allowed them to extract sharp, uniform blades from prepared cores. Levallois technology wasn't about breaking rocks randomly. It required selecting a suitable stone, shaping its surface into a dome-like form, and striking it at a calculated angle to remove a flake of predetermined size and shape. This process involved planning, symmetry, and control, hallmarks of abstract thinking and skilled craftsmanship. The resulting flakes were lightweight, sharp-edged, and easy to replace or rework, making them highly effective in hunting, butchering, and processing materials. Importantly, this technique was repeatable. Neanderthals weren't just reacting to the environment, they were using methodical systems to shape it. Their knowledge was passed from one generation to the next, suggesting not only manual skill, but also structured learning within their communities. But Neanderthal innovation extended beyond stone. They also worked with wood, a material far less likely to survive in the archaeological record, but critical to their technology. At Schöningen, Germany, archaeologists discovered wooden spears over 300,000 years old, carved from spruce and pine. Some were designed for thrusting at close range, others balanced for throwing. One tested replica could be launched accurately over 20 meters. These weapons exploited the natural curvature and grain of the wood and were crafted from dense sections near the base of trees to increase durability. Such design choices suggest a working knowledge of aerodynamics and biomechanics. These were not crude clubs. They were engineered tools, shaped with intention and adapted to specific hunting strategies. In addition to single material tools, Neanderthals developed composite technology, combining different materials into a single functional object. Several stone implements, show wear patterns and residue consistent with bindings made of sinew or plant fiber, likely fixed to wooden handles. Some tools may have been hafted with adhesives made from birch pitch, created by heating tree bark in oxygen-limited conditions. This adhesive manufacturing process required controlled fire, temperature regulation, and knowledge of chemistry, all previously underestimated in Neanderthal capabilities. This merging of materials, stone, wood, binding agents, marked a significant cognitive leap. It indicated an ability to think in terms of systems, not just objects. Rather than relying on one raw material, Neanderthals engineered tools to be modular, repairable, and optimized for task-specific use. This level of technological thinking is a precursor to modern engineering logic. Together, these findings challenge the outdated assumption that Neanderthals were technologically inferior. In reality, they had developed a diverse toolkit, rooted in skill, tradition, and experimentation. Their tools were more than weapons. They were expressions of problem-solving, manual dexterity, and intergenerational knowledge transfer. Neanderthal technology was not a footnote in human evolution. It was a parallel trajectory, one that produced results as elegant, efficient, and intelligent as anything their Homo sapiens contemporaries would later achieve. Part 4. Master hunting skills. The Neanderthals were tactical hunters, arguably among the most effective big-game hunters in pre-agricultural human history. Their survival strategy relied heavily on securing large prey, including mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, wild boar, elk, and red deer. This was not casual foraging. It was organized, cooperative, and high risk. Evidence from multiple archaeological sites suggests that Neanderthals engaged in coordinated group hunting, utilizing natural terrain features such as cliffs, ravines, and narrow passes to trap and corner animals. These hunts were not impulsive attacks. They required advanced scouting, terrain knowledge, and synchronized movement. In some cases, animals were driven toward kill zones, either ambushed in valleys or forced off ledges to ensure fatal injuries. This level of strategy implies a division of roles within hunting parties: scouts, flankers, chasers, and finishers. Communication, whether through hand signals, vocalizations, or shared behavioral cues, would have been essential. Successful hunts may have taken days of tracking, patience, and coordination. Such complexity indicates planning, experience, and social cohesion. The tools used in these hunts were relatively simple in form, primarily wooden spears with or without stone tips. But they were used with adaptability and precision. Some spears were designed for close quarters thrusting. Others, like those recovered from Schoningen, were aerodynamic enough to be thrown from a distance. Neanderthals understood the physics of weight distribution, velocity, and timing, even without formal knowledge of mechanics. Tracking was a critical component of the hunt. Neanderthals demonstrated the ability to read the landscape and interpret animal behavior. They could follow footprints, analyze scat for freshness and species identification, and observe broken branches or disturbed foliage to determine direction and speed of travel. These are not instinctive skills. They require practice, mentorship, and knowledge accumulation over generations. Once prey was brought down, Neanderthals exhibited exceptional efficiency in processing the carcass. Archaeological evidence shows cut marks on bones, consistent with precise butchering techniques. They removed meat, harvested fat, extracted marrow, collected hides, and likely used sinew for tools or bindings. Bones may have been used for fuel or repurposed as tools. Virtually nothing was wasted. This total exploitation of the animal was not just practical, it was necessary. In Ice Age conditions, food scarcity was constant and energy expenditure during hunts was high. Every successful kill had to yield maximum nutritional and material return to support the group. Wastefulness would have been dangerous. These behaviors, strategic hunting, environmental reading, multi-day tracking, and complete carcass utilization reveal a species deeply integrated with its ecosystem. Neanderthals were not passive scavengers. They were active apex predators, capable of adapting hunting strategies to local environments and prey types. Their hunting methods required not only physical strength, but also cooperation, memory, and learned technique. These were skills refined across generations, taught through experience, and adapted to changing conditions. The Neanderthal hunt was not simply survival. It was a structured, intelligent practice built on observation, communication, and skill transfer. Part 5: Diet and Biology. Neanderthal dietary patterns were shaped by necessity, availability, and biology. Isotope analysis of Neanderthal bones and microscopic study of tooth enamel reveal a diet rich in protein and fat, with as much as 80% of their caloric intake coming from animal sources. They consumed meat, marrow, fat, skin, and, on occasion, internal organs. Nutrient extraction was thorough and deliberate. Large herbivores formed the core of their diet: mammoths, rhinoceroses, bison, red deer, and wild boar. These animals provided dense caloric returns in a single kill, which was essential for survival in cold climates, where plant resources were seasonal and unreliable. In these environments, high fat content was not a luxury, it was a biological requirement. In coastal and riverine regions, Neanderthals also exploited marine and aquatic resources. Archaeological evidence shows the consumption of fish, mollusks, shellfish, and crabs. Tools and cut marks on shells confirm that these resources were not incidental, but systematically collected. Although less dominant than land-based game, aquatic protein played a supporting role in specific environments. Botanical remains found in dental calculus, hardened plaque, demonstrate that Neanderthals also consumed plant-based foods, including seeds, nuts, tubers, berries, and possibly mushrooms or insects. Some starch grains show signs of heat alteration, indicating that Neanderthals cooked plant material, likely to make it more digestible. This behavior suggests an understanding of basic food processing and nutritional chemistry. Despite this dietary diversity, the Neanderthals' biology demanded a high caloric intake, especially in colder environments. Their robust body mass, thick musculature, and short-limbed proportions all served thermoregulation, but at a metabolic cost. Estimates suggest they required 3,500 to 5,000 kilocalories per day, significantly more than modern Homo sapiens. This intense caloric demand made Neanderthals heavily dependent on animal fat and protein. While this strategy was effective in glacial periods with abundant megafauna, it left them vulnerable when ecosystems changed. If large prey populations declined due to climate shifts or overhunting, their survival margin narrowed quickly. There is also evidence that Neanderthal dietary strategies varied by region. Some groups relied more on coastal foods, others incorporated more plants. This regional adaptation reflects a flexible approach to resource management, not a single rigid diet. Their foraging strategies were informed by local ecology, seasonal availability, and group mobility. On a genetic level, the legacy of Neanderthal diet continues today. Modern humans outside Africa retain approximately 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, a result of interbreeding between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Some of these inherited genes affect fat metabolism, immune response, and even the way we process certain nutrients. This genetic legacy confirms not only coexistence, but biological integration. Neanderthals were not isolated relics of a failed lineage. They contributed to the gene pool of modern humans, and their dietary adaptations continue to influence human physiology. In summary, Neanderthal nutrition was not random. It was targeted, responsive, and essential to their survival strategy. Their understanding of food resources, animal and plant, terrestrial and aquatic, combined with their physical demands, shaped a diet that was effective, but also vulnerable to ecological disruption. Part 6: Community and Society. Neanderthals did not live in isolation. Archaeological and biological evidence points to small, tightly knit social groups, typically ranging from 10 to 30 individuals. These groups were structured and cooperative, likely organized around functional roles such as hunters, caregivers, elders, and children. In such units, social cohesion was essential to survival. Survival in harsh Ice Age environments required more than individual strength. It required mutual support. One of the most compelling examples is the discovery of a Neanderthal skeleton showing signs of long-term physical impairment, paralysis on one side of the body. Despite this condition, the individual lived for years. This could not have happened without sustained care, protection, and provision of food by others. It is direct evidence of compassion and collective responsibility. Elders appear to have held an important place in Neanderthal society. Although average life expectancy was relatively low, individuals who lived into old age carried accumulated knowledge, when to hunt, where animals migrated, how to make tools, and how to survive extreme seasonal changes. These were not casual observations. They were critical data for the group's survival. Elders likely served as living repositories of information, transmitting skills, warnings, and instructions and traditions. Children, in turn, learned through observation and imitation. There were no formal institutions, but learning was constant. Young Neanderthals would have grown up surrounded by tool-making, fire management, food preparation, and collective rituals. Knowledge was passed down verbally, visually, and physically, from experienced hands to untrained ones. Burial practices provide further insight into the social structure. Several Neanderthal remains have been found in positions that suggest deliberate burial. Some are laid on their sides, others with limbs carefully arranged. In rare cases, pollen residues from flowering plants were found near the remains. In others, personal items or tools were placed near the body. These are not random arrangements. They suggest a cultural response to death, perhaps involving mourning, memory, or even ceremony. While the existence of formal religion remains unproven, these practices imply a conceptual framework for loss and remembrance. They suggest that Neanderthals understood the difference between life and death and responded to it in consistent, symbolic ways. Spatial organization at habitation sites also points to community planning. Hearths, sleeping areas, food processing zones, and tool-making stations were arranged with order. This organization reflects roles, routines, and shared responsibilities rather than chaotic survival. Group-based life would have also reinforced identity and kinship. In an environment where encounters with outsiders were rare and potentially hostile, internal bonds would have been central to both safety and psychological stability. Cooperation was not optional, it was a strategy embedded into their social structure. In conclusion, the Neanderthal social world was cooperative, intergenerational, and emotionally aware. They cared for their injured, relied on their elders, taught their young, and possibly mourned their dead. Their society was not primitive, it was practical, resilient, and based on shared knowledge and human connection. Part 7. Clothing and hide processing. Neanderthals did not face glacial winters without protection. Although no preserved fabric or sewing tools have been recovered, indirect evidence suggests they were skilled in making clothing from animal hides, a critical adaptation for survival in sub-zero environments. Several lines of evidence support this conclusion. Cut marks on animal bones indicate systematic skinning practices. Stone scraping tools, used to remove fat and tissue from hides, have been found at multiple Neanderthal sites. In addition, heavy wear on Neanderthal front teeth suggests they used their mouths to grip and stretch hides during processing, a common technique in pre-industrial societies. After skinning, hides needed further treatment to prevent decay and ensure flexibility. Neanderthals likely cleaned, dried, and softened hides using animal fat, bone marrow, or controlled exposure to smoke. At some archaeological sites, residues point to the use of tannins, plant-based chemicals extracted from tree bark. implying a primitive form of leather tanning. Though no written instructions existed, the methods appear consistent and effective. Clothing construction was likely simple but functional. Hides may have been tied with cords or sinew to form cloaks, leggings, or footwear. There is no evidence of sewing needles with eyes, but piercing hides with pointed tools and threading strips through holes would have produced secure, adjustable garments. Experimental reconstructions suggest that to survive Ice Age conditions in Central Europe, up to 90% of the body would have needed coverage, especially extremities prone to frostbite. Neanderthal clothing must have been well designed for insulation and mobility, even without textile weaving or stitching. Beyond warmth, clothing may have had social or symbolic significance. Differences in hide color, cut, or ornamentation could have served as visual markers of identity, status, or group affiliation. Although such interpretations remain speculative, the effort invested in hide preparation implies more than mere necessity. The ability to work hides efficiently demonstrates advanced material knowledge and tool use. Transforming a fresh animal skin into a wearable, weather-resistant item required a multi-stage process: planning, coordination, and skill. This was not opportunistic scavenging. It was purposeful craftsmanship, applied consistently across regions and generations. While the organic materials themselves rarely survive, the cultural and technological implications are clear. Neanderthals understood their environment and developed tailored responses to its challenges. Clothing was not an optional innovation. It was a core component of daily life, protection, and possibly social meaning. In extreme Ice Age climates, survival depended not only on food and shelter, but on body insulation and mobility. The evidence shows that Neanderthals met that challenge with efficiency, adaptation, and ingenuity. Part 8. Disappearance and Theories. Around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals disappeared from the fossil record. Their extinction was not sudden, but gradual, occurring over thousands of years. The exact cause remains debated. Multiple overlapping factors likely contributed. The available evidence points to a complex convergence, not a single catastrophic event. One major hypothesis involves climate change. During the late Pleistocene, Earth underwent dramatic environmental shifts. As glacial cycles intensified, ecosystems changed rapidly. Cold-adapted Neanderthals depended on large herbivores such as mammoths, bison, and woolly rhinoceroses. When these species declined or migrated due to habitat disruption, Neanderthals lost critical food sources. Their specialized hunting strategies may not have adapted fast enough to ecological instability. A second factor was competition with Homo sapiens. Modern humans began arriving in Europe and parts of Western Asia around 45,000 years ago. They brought more flexible technologies, advanced social networks, and broader trade and communication systems. Homo sapiens utilized more diverse food sources, created lighter and more efficient tools, and possibly developed symbolic culture that facilitated larger group cohesion. In regions where both species coexisted, resource competition would have increased. Demographic vulnerability also played a role. Neanderthal populations were small, scattered, and isolated. Estimates suggest very low population density, sometimes less than 0.02 individuals per square kilometer. Such sparse distribution limited genetic diversity and made Neanderthal groups extremely susceptible to disease outbreaks, environmental disasters, or reproductive decline. Another contributing factor was genetic bottlenecking. With limited mating networks and reduced population size, Neanderthals suffered from inbreeding and loss of genetic variation. This may have impaired their adaptability, immune response, and long-term viability as environments continued to change. Importantly, there is no evidence that Neanderthals were driven to extinction due to intellectual inferiority. Archaeological records show sophisticated tools, organized hunting strategies, community care, and possible symbolic expression. They were not primitive or incapable. Their disappearance was not a failure of intelligence, but a result of environmental pressures and systemic disadvantages. some Neanderthal groups may have interbred with Homo sapiens rather than vanish entirely. Genetic studies confirm that 1 to 2% of the DNA in modern non-African populations originates from Neanderthals. This proves that they did not simply vanish. They merged, at least partially, into the gene pool of the surviving species. In summary, the extinction of Neanderthals likely involved rapid climate fluctuations, decline of key food sources, competition with expanding Homo sapiens, small, fragmented population structure, low genetic diversity. Each of these on its own would have posed a challenge. Together, they created conditions that Neanderthal populations could not overcome. What remains clear is this: they did not disappear in vain. Their tools, behavior, and genes live on, in archaeological records, in scientific models, and in the DNA of modern humans. Their extinction marks the end of a lineage, but not the end of their influence. Part 9, A Living Legacy. Neanderthals did not completely disappear. While their distinct lineage came to an end around 40,000 years ago, their legacy persists, biologically, behaviorally, and culturally within modern humans. Genetically, the connection is clear. Studies of ancient DNA show that 1 to 2% of the genome of non-African populations today is inherited from Neanderthals. These genes influence a range of traits, from immune system function to fat metabolism. In concrete terms, their DNA still shapes how we respond to infection, process nutrients, and even perceive pain. But the legacy is not limited to biology. Certain instinctive behaviors and social tendencies observed in humans today echo patterns inferred from Neanderthal archaeology. The use of fire for gathering, warmth, and cooking is universal. The structure of shared meals, the formation of close-knit groups, and the care for the young and elderly are not recent inventions. These behaviors were part of Neanderthal life long before modern civilization. Cultural memory also plays a role. Across human societies, people gather around central sources of light: campfires, hearths, candles, stage lights. We pass down stories. We mourn the dead with ceremony. These rituals are not exclusive to Homo sapiens. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthals engaged in similar acts of storytelling, burial, and symbolic expression. They hunted strategically, planned tool use, protected group members, and likely communicated in complex ways. These are not signs of instinct-driven animals. They are hallmarks of cognitive, adaptable hominins. The difference between them and us is not intelligence, but continuity. Neanderthals were a parallel human species, shaped by the same forces of evolution, equipped with similar capabilities, operating in a different ecological and temporal window. Rather than viewing them as evolutionary failures, it is more accurate to see them as a sister lineage, one that reached remarkable levels of adaptation and complexity, but did not survive the combined pressures of environment and competition. They did not vanish into obscurity. They were absorbed into the expanding Homo sapiens population, leaving traces that persist in our very structure. When we study Neanderthals, we are not simply reconstructing an extinct species. We are examining a reflection of ourselves, our capacities, our vulnerabilities, and our shared origins. In many ways, they represent the human condition strict to its essentials: cooperation, adaptability, intelligence, and resilience. They are part of our story, not just as ancestors in our genome, but as early expressions of what it meant to be human. In evolutionary terms, we are the survivors, but in cultural and biological terms, they are still with us, in our blood, in our behaviors, and in the enduring traces of a shared past that science continues to uncover.